Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this video, we got to talk about signed books. Are they worth it? That is right. Signature signed books. You guys know what I'm talking about. All of those CGC books that get slabbed with that beautiful gold label. How are the prices of signed books? Should they be commanding the premiums that they do? Well, in this video, we're going to talk about that. In fact, this is actually a video inspired by a friend of the channel, Matt, aka MK Collects, that was throwing out the idea that based on the kind of influx of inventory being sent into CGC for the Todd Mcfarlane signing we just had, he was even making the case that next year, the prices of those books coming back are going to be cheaper than what it would cost to get them graded, signed, and bought off of eBay for the prices that they are today. So in this video, we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about signed books. But before I get into that, if you guys could drop me a like or a comment or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, helps with the channel, do one of those things, and let's talk about signature books. All right, the first thing we got to do is give a shout out to Matt here. Matt's a good friend of the channel, and he made this post that I thought was a interesting discussion being had. There's a lot of great comments here. If you guys want to go check out Matt's page and kind of do some reading. A lot of people had some interesting insights. But he had this to say, putting it out there. What do you all think about this? I'm going to go ahead and predict that next year you're going to be able to pick up a Todd Mcfarlane CGC Signature Series book for significantly less than the cost of the book plus the CGC signing fee itself. When they release the total of number of books sent in, it's going to be jaw-dropping. Well, before we kind of really dig into this, let's talk about this CGC announcement. This was actually something that happened a few months back. CGC was doing a big signing with Todd Mcfarlane. I think the deadline for the signing was mid to late November, which means that the Todd father himself is probably doing a lot of the signings as we speak, and those books will be hitting the market or coming back to everybody, I suppose, in a couple months' time. So here is the signing that was being promoted by CGC. Of course, they're doing the custom Todd Mcfarlane label. CGC has done signature labels like this before, most notably with Stan Lee, and it does, in fact, seem like the Stan Lee Signature Series labels do command maybe a tiny premium. As you can see right here, it is a $5 fee for this specific label. And I have sort of anecdotally noticed that when you get the Stan Lee signature label, of course, due to rarity and scarcity, I say rarity and scarcity in jest, but due to that label, of course, you are able to command a little bit more of a premium because there's not as many people that can undercut you. And so CGC here has like kind of all the information and the press kit and the PR, but here's the main sort of takeaway. The CGC in-house private signing fee for a comic book signed by Todd Mcfarlane is $120 per item. So that would be $120. Let's say that you were going to get the signature label. That bumps it up to $125. Of course, you got to slab the book from CGC itself. That's another whatever, $20, $30, $40, depending on what you're sending in. But that's a price that, we won't really count because we're going to compare signature prices to CGC blue label prices. So you're going to have to pay that fee regardless. But let's say that there's a kind of a convenience fee. Whoever sends in their Todd Mcfarlane book is probably going to want to see a little bit of a return on the effort that they put into it. So here's the thing Matt was throwing out once again. He believes there's going to be so many books sent in that next year, the prices for those books are going to be cheaper than what the total package for you to have sent it in would have effectively cost you. So let's kind of talk about that. Let's kind of break this down. Now, I will say sort of out of the gate, that is possible, but due to factors not just for supply of inventory, due to factors of comic book prices themselves. I mean, we are going into 2023. We've talked about, the bear market many times before. It is possible that comic book prices could be cheaper by the time these books get back outside of the factors of the census of Signature Series books. I mean, maybe right now if I go onto eBay, it costs me whatever, $20 to buy the Spawn #1. Maybe in March of next year, it costs me $10 to buy the Spawn #1. So I think outside of those factors, certainly it's possible that the prices could be lower than they are today. But with that aside, let's talk about this idea of the census. And so I have a couple of Todd Mcfarlane books that we can only assume are going to be popular books that got sent in. Most specifically, I'm talking about, of course, Spawn #1. We got ASM number 300. And the other book I want to talk about is Incredible Hulk 340. Three classic Todd Mcfarlane books that are often signed by Todd Mcfarlane. And I think these are the ones that'll be interesting to sort of break down in terms of their numbers. So looking at the CGC Universal Census for Spawn number 1 right here, we see that this book has 26,000 total graded, but let's take a look at the ratio of blue labels to signature labels. So we have 21,945 books that are slammed of Spawn number 1 in a blue label. So if I were to do the kind of quick napkin math, seeing that these signature books have about 4278 on the census, and we know that there's 26,000 total graded, that's about a 17%, roughly speaking, of the total books of Spawn number 1 that have signature signed copies out there. I'm going to assume, just for the simplicity of this video, that let's just say that all the signed books are signed by Todd Mcfarlane. I mean, for all I know, some of those signed books could be signed by Ken Stacy right here. So let's just assume that those are all Todd Mcfarlane books to make the math easy. So about 17% of Spawn books are signature series. If we go down here to ASM 300, we see that the signature series has 4640, 31,000 here. Quick math, that's roughly around 15% of the books. Again, I'm going to just assume that all of those are signed by Todd McFarlane. I realize that they're not. And then right here, Incredible Hulk 340, we see 1,300 CGC signed books of a universal grades here of 10,532. So that's kind of a little bit less at 12 to 13% overall. So we have this huge signing going on here. There's going to be a lot of submissions for books going in. And what do the kind of value breakdowns kind of look like when we're talking about signed books in proportion to that of their blue label counterparts? So let's take a look at Spawn number 1, take a look at the 9.8s, and let's focus on the 30-day moving here. $185 at the CGC 9.8 grade in the last 30 days. If we quickly bounce over to the signature books, what kind of premium are we looking at here? 9.8s have a premium of $445. So definitely almost 3x the price for the signed version of the book. And if we do the quick math of $445 minus $185, we're talking about a $260 window. So CGC was charging $120 plus $5 for the custom label. So let's say your time, your handling, all of that stuff will take away another $20 or $25. So you're looking at $100 return here, and that's kind of the margin we're looking at for this particular book. Will that be able to sort of sustain itself? Let's say that we get an influx of inventory into the market. Are we going to have that number shrink? Well, it does seem like there's going to be a lot of copies out there, but unless the numbers are really very drastic, I mean, how many do we think are going to be added to the census? If we know that there's 4,278 copies of Spawn 1 already out there, I mean, were there 1,000 copies submitted of Spawn 1? Were there 4,000 copies submitted of Spawn 1? I mean, there is going to be a breaking point where if all of a sudden you add, another 2,000 copies onto, the census, and then based on that proportion to the blue labels, there is going to be a breaking point, but it's going to be impossible to sort of predict. All we can tell for sure right now is that there does appear to be a premium on the signed books. Now, is that actually the case beyond that of the 9.8 grades? Let's take a look at the 9.6s and the 9.4s. 30-day moving for 9.6 is 73. 9.4 30-day moving is 61. When we go over to the signature books, we don't see a 30-day moving on the 9.6, but we do have a 30-day moving on the 9.4, and we saw a $325 sale. So we're still kind of working within a margin that covers our costs to do this submission. Now let's jump over to the ASM 300 and see if this kind of still holds true, generally speaking, as we do the breakdowns. Let's take a look at the universal grades. 9.8's 30-day moving is around $4,100. Signature series 9.8's 30-day moving is around $5,000. So here you have a much bigger window as far as the value range is concerned for this book. Let's take a look at the 9.6s and the 9.4. So 2,800 9.6, 1,000 9.4. If we go to the universal grade, 9.6 is 1,400 and 9.4 is 800. So, the 9.4, you still have kind of the appropriate margin window of around $250 or so. The 9.6, you have a more generous window of almost pushing around 1,000. In fact, actually more than 1,000. And even here, when you go down to the 7.0 range and you see the 30-day moving at 389, 90-day at 408. Well, if I go over to the signature, we can actually see that there was a 90-day moving sale for this book at the $1,300 range at the 7.0. That's definitely a book that probably would not have sold the 7.0, because there's so many other other options for people out there in the market, and someone was still willing to pay $1,300, which is a lot more than what the 7.0 would normally go for at $408. So, a really good margin overall. And I think that's one of the, kind of first things that I'm thinking about in terms of our signature series books worth it. Well, in a vacuum, it really does depend on who we're talking about here. Todd Mcfarlane is an extremely popular artist. His books are always going to be in demand. Similarly, I think signatures from Stan Lee are always going to be in demand as well, or Jack Kirby, or, legendary people in the space. But if we're looking at other signatures from people like Roy Thomas, or even modern artists like Ryan Stegman, or writers like Donny Cates, I don't necessarily think there's always going to be a premium on those signatures, simply due to the fact that they're just not going to be as rare or not going to be as celebrated as far as a collectible item is concerned. But in a lot of cases, I do think that these iconic books like Incredible Hulk 340 that are signed by artists like Todd Mcfarlane, even if the census is really high, I do think can still hold a bit of a premium, where if I go down here to the 349.0 and I see the 30-day moving signed by Todd Mcfarlane is $405, where if I go over to the blue label 9.0, it's still 30-day moving is only $153. So you're still kind of operating in that margin where the signature series book is going to cover the cost of what it would take for you to get the Todd Mcfarlane signature anyways. And I do think that for the most part, even if the census is really high, I feel like the people who are submitting their books are going to be willing to at least, stick to the price that it costs for them to get the book signed. I mean, I think that is generally only fair. I mean, it's the same way how, finding a slab book of a completely, worthless thing is still going to cost you like $24, $25, the price to send it into CGC regardless. And it doesn't really matter if there's already a million copies out there. And in fact, if I go over here and I do this sort of really unscientific experiment, and I just type in Todd Mcfarlane CGC signature, and I go to buy it now, and then I list by the lowest price I can find, like how much would it cost me to get a Todd Mcfarlane signature? All I wanted was a signature by him. I don't care what the book is. I don't care what grade it is. I just am a super fan of Todd Mcfarlane. If I go here and I want it now, the cheapest book I can find for myself is this Amazing Spider-Man 324 9.6. It's still going to cost me $236. So if I minus the slab price of $20, if I minus the fact that I had to buy ASM 324, which, I mean, how much could it be? A $5 to $10 book, it's still going to cost me sort of that $200 price point, which is still more than what it would cost me to sort of send in the book to get it signed by Todd Mcfarlane. And I do think that even with an influx of supply, I do believe that the Todd Mcfarlane signed stuff, signed collectibles, can hold their prices. I think of Todd Mcfarlane as, a lot like Stan Lee, where there is a floor price for his signature. And if I go over here to the Stan Lee signature and I look it up, what's the cheapest Stan Lee book I could possibly find for myself today? Well, it's this Submariner one at 9.6 here, a book I've never even heard of, that still is going to run me $433. And that is actually, probably in line to what I see with Stan Lee signed books, where Stan Lee's signature itself still costs around $400. It almost doesn't matter what book you're buying. You could buy like a True Believers book with a Stan Lee sig, and it's still going to run you that price point overall, because getting his signature on a book was in fact expensive. If you went to a con to get a Stan Lee signature, you were definitely paying, at least like $200 or whatever the case was, and the line was going to be enormous. So it took a long time for people to get that signature, even if there are tons and tons of them out there, which there definitely are. And then if you put that on a book that is, really desired in the market, like an Avengers 1 or whatever the case is, that is going to be able to command a very hefty premium on it. And I think that Todd Mcfarlane is one of those artists that can also sort of command that premium. It will be interesting to see what happens. I think books like Spawn #1 are going to be interesting to see if they can kind of keep a little bit of a premium value on them. I think books like ASM 300, Incredible Hulk 340, Todd Mcfarlane, books like that, I still believe are always going to be desired to be signed by him. But the Spawn #1 is maybe the one that is going to have that correction a little bit. Other artists out there, if we think about Jim Lee or Roy Thomas, I don't believe that those signature books will always be able to command a premium. I think a lot of sellers will always, ask for at least their costs to be covered for the signing itself. But if we were doing a big Jim Lee signing this coming month, and next year we took a look at the prices and we had, tens of thousands of books hitting eBay, I don't know if the Jim Lee signing would be able to command that premium. I think that Todd Mcfarlane is just a special figure in the space. Anyways, that's all I have for this video. That was me sort of breaking down when I think about, signed books. I do think that as CGC does more of these special signings, I do think it'll be interesting to see, how the censuses react. What I generally think is going to happen, though, is that, if we get more signed books, it'll just become that like a signed book is the next grade. It's like you got 9.4, 9.6, 9.8, 9.8 signed. It's still going to have that little bit of a premium because, no matter what the case is, it's going to always be that much more rare until Todd Mcfarlane literally signs every single Spawn #1 out there, which, who knows? Maybe in 20 years' time, he will actually do that. Anyways, that's all for this video. Let me know what you guys think. What do you guys think about signed books? Drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, and I'll see you in the next one.